Welcome to the It's Probably Fine Club. I started this club for all the people who thought something was probably fine, or they were told something was probably fine, and later discovered it was absolutely not. Today, I'm going to tell you about a time a complete stranger figured out something about my husband 7 years before I did. And at the time, I thought she was completely crazy. So let's get started. This story begins around 2010. My husband and I were taking Financial Peace University, which is a personal finance program created by Dave Ramsey. At the time, we were trying to get our finances under control. We had 3 children. We both had professional careers. We had bills. We had debt. We were trying to be responsible adults. Now, one thing that was really frustrating me was that my husband would agree with the budgeting process, but he wouldn't consistently participate in it. He would say he wanted to do it. He would say he agreed with it. But then he wouldn't track receipts. He wouldn't follow through on the spending plan. He wouldn't do the things we'd agreed to do. And it wasn't because he was openly refusing. It was more like he would agree, and then somehow it just wouldn't happen. Over and over and over. So I scheduled a counseling call through the program. Now, here's an important detail. This counselor had never met me. She'd never met my husband. She lived in another state. This was the very first conversation that I ever had with her. I spent a few minutes describing the situation, and then she said something that absolutely shocked me. She said, "Whenever I've seen this type of situation before, it's usually because one spouse has a significant alcohol or drug problem." I remember sitting there thinking, what? Absolutely not. Not my husband. My husband was an attorney. He worked for a federal judge. He was active in our church. He was a Boy Scout leader. He was respected in the community. There was absolutely no way that was the explanation. In my mind, she had jumped to a ridiculous conclusion. I remember thinking, this woman doesn't know us. She's never met us. How could she possibly think that's the issue? So I basically dismissed it. I thanked her for her time and I moved on because obviously she was wrong, or so I thought. Now, fast forward about 7 years. One day, our life insurance company called. They had recently completed medical exams for the renewal of our policies. They told me they'd be happy to renew my policy, but they would not be renewing my husband's. Now, naturally, I wanted to know why, but because of medical privacy laws, they wouldn't tell me. They told me the lab results were available online and that my husband could review them. So we did. And what I found was shocking. His liver tests were severely abnormal. One particular test was so far out of range that I looked it up, and it was commonly associated with heavy alcohol use. When I confronted him, he admitted that he had been drinking much more than I realized. At first, he minimized it. Then more details came out. Then more details and more details. And eventually, doctors diagnosed him with liver cirrhosis. Then one day, I got a phone call from a hospital. He had been transported by ambulance after mixing alcohol and opioid medication. His blood alcohol level was so high that the nurse told me it would have been lethal for most people. But he was still carrying on a normal conversation without slurring his speech or anything, which meant his body had adapted to functioning at levels that would incapacitate or kill many others. Eventually, he spent a week in the hospital, then additional time in a treatment facility, then 90 days in inpatient rehabilitation. And during that process, I learned something that stunned me. He admitted he had been struggling with alcohol since he was 12 years old. 12. And he told me he was already an alcoholic when I met him in 1992. He had simply hidden it for decades. And suddenly, I remembered that phone call from 7 years earlier, the counselor, the stranger, the woman I thought was crazy, the woman who never met either of us, the woman who listened to me for a few minutes and immediately said, "This sounds like addiction. Now, here's the part that fascinates me. She wasn't seeing something I couldn't see. She wasn't reading medical records. She wasn't talking to my husband. In fact, she never spoke to him. She wasn't looking at lab results. She was recognizing a pattern. She had probably talked to hundreds or thousands of people about financial problems, and somewhere along the way, she learned that a certain pattern often points to addiction. She recognized it immediately. I didn't recognize it for 7 more years. And that brings us to today's lesson. Sometimes experts aren't seeing more facts than you are. Sometimes they've simply seen the pattern before. The financial counselor saw a problem that was a pattern that she'd seen many times over her career. But I saw a budgeting problem. She was right and I was wrong. And because I thought it was probably fine, I ignored one of the earliest clues. So, for all new and existing members of the It's Probably Fine Club, have you ever had someone tell you something that sounded completely ridiculous at the time, only to discover years later they were actually right? Leave it in the comments below. We may feature it in a future episode. And remember, the details matter more than people think they do. I'll see you next time.